I helped my best friend's family for years. But they turned on me. Ethan had always known he was different. The outsider in the world of his best friend, Ava, and her wealthy family. He had spent years proving his worth, working tirelessly to help them while they enjoyed their privileges. Ethan was the one who made sure things ran smoothly. When Ava wanted to start a business, he drafted the entire plan. When her father's company was struggling, Ethan was the one who suggested the restructuring that saved them. And when Ava's brother needed a job, Ethan used his connections to get him in the door. Yet, no matter how much he gave, no matter how much he sacrificed, Ethan always felt like the extra piece in their perfect puzzle. Ava's family was full of money, connections, and power, but they lacked the drive that he had. They could afford to make mistakes, and Ethan was always the one picking up the pieces. He watched as they lived their lives without a care in the world, while he worked to build his own future. It wasn't just that they relied on him. It was that they never truly appreciated the effort. Ethan kept going because he believed in loyalty, in the idea that families should always have each other's backs. But deep down, he knew that the scales weren't balanced. Ava and her family never had to fight for anything. Everything was handed to them, while he had to scrape and hustle for every opportunity. He told himself that one day things would change, but as he watched them take from him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was invisible. As time passed, Ethan started to feel the strain. He gave more than he ever received, and yet when he needed them, they were never around. He had done everything for them. He had helped them build their empire, and yet, he was still the one left standing on the outside. When Ethan walked into their home one night, expecting to be treated as family, what he didn't expect was the bombshell that followed. "We don't need you." Ava's voice was sharp, final. It hit harder than anything he'd ever experienced. And just like that, all his years of loyalty, all the sacrifices he had made, were suddenly nothing. Ethan stood there, frozen, as the words hung in the air, suffocating him. "We don't need you." Ava's voice, sharp and cold, echoed in his ears. His whole body went rigid, his mind struggling to process what was happening. After everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed, this was how it ended. He had spent years helping Ava, her father, and the entire family, fixing their problems, solving their issues before they even realized they had them. And now, in one single moment, it felt like it was all erased. The weight of their words hit harder than he ever expected, and the crushing realization settled in. They had never truly valued him. Ethan had always been the one in the background, the one who stayed up late working on their business plans, the one who used his connections to help them rise, all while they coasted on the success of his efforts. And now, Ava was telling him, in front of her parents, that they didn't need him. They were perfectly fine without him. Her mother nodded, confirming it. "You're always in the way." Ethan could feel his blood boil, but he remained silent. As his mind raced, his thoughts were drowned out by Ava's continued smugness. She didn't even seem to care that her words had cut deep. In her eyes, he was nothing more than a tool they had used, discarded when no longer needed. Ethan had spent years thinking he was part of the family, but in that moment, he realized just how wrong he was. He had been a stepping stone in their world, a world built on their inherited wealth, power, and privilege, while he had to claw his way through every obstacle just to be recognized. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, struggling to keep his emotions in check. But no more. They didn't need him? Fine. Ethan wasn't going to fight, beg, or plead for them to see his worth. He simply stood up, grabbed his coat, and without a word, walked out the door. There was no slamming, no dramatic exit. Just a calm, calculated departure. The cold air hit him as he stepped onto the street. But instead of feeling the sting, a sense of freedom washed over him. He was finally free from the toxic, suffocating world they had created. For weeks, Ethan ignored the calls. Ignored the texts. Ignored the guilt they tried to push his way. Ava and her family had made it clear. He was nothing but a burden. Someone they'd toss aside when it was convenient. But now, as the days passed, the desperation became harder to hide. The calls turned into voicemails. And then the messages flooded in. Each one was more frantic than the last. "We need to talk," Ava's voice cracked in one message, trying to sound casual. But he could hear the weight of her panic. Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't interested in hearing their excuses, in hearing how everything had fallen apart without him. Then, the text from her father arrived. "I need your advice. Call me when you can." Oh, so now they needed him. Now that their empire was collapsing, the same people who had discarded him were begging for his help. It wasn't just the company falling apart, everything in their world was slipping, crumbling. Because Ethan had been the one who kept it all together. Without him, Ava's business couldn't thrive. Her father's company was losing steam. And the cracks were widening by the day. At first, he was content to let them suffer. He had done his part for years. But now they were reaping the consequences of their arrogance. But then, after one last round of ignored calls, Ethan finally decided it was time. He let his phone ring one more time, answering with a calm, almost detached tone. "You need me now, don't you?" On the other end, Ava's father hesitated, his voice strained, admitting what Ethan already knew. "We were wrong. We all were." Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch between them. He had all the power now. "So, what exactly are you offering me?" The words were hard for him to say. But they came out, defeated. "We need you back." Ethan almost laughed. "You need me back? You threw me away like I was nothing. And now, suddenly, you need me?" He paused, letting the bitterness sink in. "Not anymore. You're on your own. Figure it out." He could hear the frustration building in his father's voice. But Ethan wasn't going to be the one to fix their mess. Not this time. It was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan could feel his heart pound in his chest. Not from fear, but from the sheer satisfaction of knowing that he had finally regained control. For years, he had bent over backward, putting his energy and talent into their world, only for them to cast him aside when it suited them. Now, it was their turn to suffer, and Ethan wasn't going to let them off easy. The messages kept flooding in, each one more desperate than the last. His phone buzzed non-stop. Ava, her father, even her mother, each of them begging for a chance to fix things. At first, it was subtle, almost apologetic. Ava's first message was almost too casual, trying to act like nothing had happened. "We should talk," she wrote, as if everything was fine. Ethan didn't even respond, letting it sit there, just as they had done to him for so long. The next day, her father's text was blunt, direct. "I need your advice. Call me." That was the moment Ethan realized what they were really after. They didn't miss him, they missed his skills, his expertise. They missed the power he brought to the table. They were scrambling, trying to fix what they had broken. And now, they thought he would swoop in to save them. But Ethan wasn't about to save them. Not anymore. It was only when he saw the desperation in their words, When Ava finally admitted the truth, that he allowed himself to think for just a moment. She called, her voice shaky, barely holding it together. "I messed up." "We all did," she said, breaking down. "The business is failing. Dad's company is struggling." Ethan let the silence linger, giving her a chance to soak in the weight of her own words. She continued, now pleading, "We need you. Please, we're desperate." But Ethan didn't jump to help. Instead, he let the moment hang in the air. "They need me now," he thought, savoring the irony. "But it wasn't too long ago that they told me I was nothing, that they didn't need me." He took a deep breath, steadying himself before replying. "You need me back now, huh?" His voice was calm, calculated, a stark contrast to the desperation on the other end of the line. "It's too late. I've built something of my own. You can't have me back just because you messed everything up." The words tasted sweet as they left his lips. There was a long pause. Ava's voice wavered on the other end, unsure, trying to regain some sense of control. But Ethan was done playing by their rules. He had built something of his own, something they would never be able to take down. He had everything they had always wanted, and they had never realized it until now. The calls didn't stop. The desperation was palpable now, but Ethan had already made up his mind. They had pushed him aside for years, belittled his worth, treated him like a tool to be used when convenient. Now, they wanted him to fix their mess. They had no idea how much he had changed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control, about standing his ground. He wasn't the same person he used to be. As the days passed, the messages grew more frantic. First, Ava's voice trembling through a voicemail. Then came her father's harsh texts, followed by her mother's pleading, almost apologetic messages. Ethan could feel the shift, the panic. They were losing everything they had once taken for granted. The empire they had built without him, using his talents, was crumbling. They hadn't realized it before, but now the truth was clear. They needed him, and they were desperate. Ethan let it play out. He read each message, listening to every voicemail, knowing they were at the end of their rope. He hadn't been tempted to answer, to come running to the rescue like he once would have. This time, he didn't care. They had given him nothing, left him to fend for himself while they lived in luxury. Now, they had the audacity to call him back, expecting him to clean up their disaster. It was almost laughable. But then came the email. From their biggest competitor. Ethan smirked as he read it. Word had gotten out about the family's struggles, and this company saw an opportunity. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was an invitation. An invitation to join forces, to take everything the family had built and make it his own. Ethan didn't hesitate. He scheduled the meeting, knowing full well how this was going to play out. When he walked into that office, it was clear to everyone there that he wasn't just some outsider anymore. He was the one in charge now. His rise was unstoppable. The competitor saw him as a partner, not a liability, and that was the final nail in the coffin for Ava and her family. Weeks later, the news broke. The competitor had swooped in, taken over their biggest contracts, secured investors, and left nothing behind. Ava called again. But this time, Ethan couldn't help but laugh. "You ruined us," she screamed through the phone. But in reality, they had ruined themselves. Ethan had simply given them a taste of their own medicine. He had watched them crumble, and it felt sweeter than anything he had ever experienced before. They had underestimated him, and now, they had to face the consequences. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Was Ethan right to walk away from everything and let his family fall? Or should he have given them a second chance to make things right? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share if you enjoyed this story. Let's get the conversation going.